All right, so far for assignment 6, doing text and poster design, putting custom type design with our spot illustrations, and then putting a background and a border behind them to get a finished poster concept. You could also think of it as a key art concept. It doesn't need to be this format. It could be square, perfect for social media posting. It could be a banner. It could be a landscape format wider than it is tall, but it needs to have a combination of text, image, background, and border. So we'll talk about all those things. And we want it at a resolution for printing. So I've been working on the cover of this campus coloring book. And this is where I got so far. I had refined and modified an existing typeface in Illustrator, saved it as a vector EPS. So to remind you of some of those steps, let me open that EPS up in Illustrator because it's not finished yet. I have the line art of my spot illustration there just so I'm always mindful of how the two will work together. And that's really important when you're doing any kind of print design work, that you're thinking of the elements and how they interact with each other. So right now they're not overlapping at all, but my intention with my sketch is to have them overlap a little bit so they really integrate with each other, even though they're two separate vector elements. So let me have my sketch showing in the corner so I know what I can work with. And there's some additional elements to play with there. It's always good to post your sketches, always good to know your process. It's always going to be helpful, and it's good for your portfolio to keep your process work as well. So this is the typeface that I was working with in Photoshop, and then in Illustrator I modified it and I did the text on the path. So to remind you of how I do that, I'll do this on a new layer. Remember, you use layers as organizational tools in Illustrator. I will lock the others so I don't accidentally mess up something that I've done. And then I am going to draw an empty path. I'll just use the pencil tool. I like this Illustrator setup. This is Illustrator 2021, but in the window, I'm using the workspace that is Essentials Classic because it shows you more of the tools I find most useful. And it also gives you the options at the top, which are otherwise hidden. You can just leave it on the table, Alex. Thanks. So if I want to make text appear on a path, which you can't really do in Photoshop. In Photoshop, you can only arc it or use kind of the filtered ways of distortion that they give you as options. I'm just going to draw that freeform path, maybe a nice curve like that. And then under the type tool, I'm going to hold it down and use the type on path tool. It will fill it with Latin text. So I'm going to type in what I want. This is just to review. And then as a type tool, it's very helpful. It's like a word processor. I can increase the point size of those vectors within that typeface. I can change the typeface. And I believe it will give me a nice little preview too, which is great. Trying to remember the one that I downloaded. Bubblegum was one of the ones I downloaded. Briley Crush was another one, kind of like that. Why don't I use that? So once it is like that, you can still use the tools of the typeface. Like say I don't like all this space that's here. I can hold down Option and I can use my arrow keys to adjust the kerning, the space between the letters. If I want the W bigger, I can increase the point size of just the W and then play with the kerning to shrink it in a little bit. Because you want the space to feel even and readable between all letters. So let's say this is what I I liked. I mean, I could shrink the 2 and then adjust that kerning. So after you've played all those games and you've gotten it with the type tool close to what you think you might be able to use, then you use your large selection tool. And I recommend that you always make a copy of it because you don't want to lose your type layer, but you want to copy it. So you select it all, you go to Edit Copy. You create a new layer within Illustrator. You lock the old and turn it off. And then you're going to say Edit Paste in Place. So that will just copy the text layer on, or the text tool that you've written into a new layer. And then you right click on it and you say Create Outlines. That's like live tracing, and it will convert it to its vector shapes. Thank you. So once they are vector shapes, you can use your lasso to individually select letters, like let's say the W here. This is very common in title flag design. And then you can use your large selection tool to just scale and rotate each letter individually. You can use your small selection tool, and you can use the lasso. This is a nice trick to select one part of the type, and then your selection tool, your small selection tool, will move all of that in one direction or another. And of course, you can just redraw it with my favorite tool, the pencil tool. If I wanted this welcome to be more elaborate and arc over the E, I can do that. Then what if I wanted to carry these highlights over? Well, that's done with the eraser tool. You can double click on that, set a size for your eraser. That's way too big. Remember, these are not in pixels, these are in point sizes. So it's all relative in a vector. And then I can just cut away little highlights that way. But we don't want any white shapes in our black text. We want just black text shapes. So I have a ways to go to match this. But all it takes is knowing where the vector is and knowing how I can affect it. So it's all on this layer. So I can select this shape, and then I can redraw. I'm just doing this all with the mouse. And I have the pencil tool set to smooth. Not all the way smooth, but a little smooth. Whoops. And you have to end on the path, start on the path, and end on the path, right? That's why a refined sketch is really helpful to kind of keep you accountable to what you were planning to do. So my W is more like that. I love that smoothing tool for type design because I'm a little shakier with my drawing generally. So I like that W. Let's fix the bottom here a little bit. Then the E. And you want to improve things as you go, improve the readability. So I don't want that E to be so close. I want to give it a little bit more space. Make sure it stays readable. And that the direction change is really clear in the belly of that E. Then the L, I actually want to make it a capital L. I want to hook the corner back here, almost like it has a serif. bring the L up and around like so, like a wave. And then I want to pinch it into the corner and swell it at the tip. So type design is something you can spend a lot of time perfecting, playing with the spacing, customizing it. I'm going to soften this corner a little bit. It's my hope. There we go. And then dip it in a little bit more dramatically, but maybe that's too dramatic. So it's something to play with, using all those same tools. So that's coming along, and you can see how customizing the type, it helps to start with something existing, and then to know what you're trying to do, and to improve it from there. So that kind of has the same flavor as my sketch. And I can use that, I can continue with that. But of course, there are other ways to make vectors, black type vectors, and I want to remind you of that. So if I go to my refined sketch, which I put together in Photoshop, have it in my assignment 6 folder. What if I bring that in and I live trace it, just like we did with our line art from scanned line art? That's another option you have. So lots of ways towards getting a vector. And I can even just take my simple screen grab of it, drag and drop it, because it's a raster file, into Illustrator. I'll keep it nice and big, why not? But I'm going to move it up to the top. And I'm going to move it, once I place it, I hit return, or just click off of it. Right? I'm going to move it on its own layer. Turn off the others, other things I'm playing with. And now this big file, it is pixel based. You can see the pixels. This is put together and cleaned up in Photoshop. So just like we used my ink sketch to make the line art for my spot illustration that we then colored, now I'm just going to use this to live trace, to remind you of this, a black and white logo. Live tracing works best when it's just black shapes, in my experience. And then I'm going to use the advanced options right there. Use the triangle to say advanced. And first thing, I want to ignore whites. I don't want white vector shapes. I only want black vector shapes. Okay, now I can zoom in, especially on the type, and see the kind of errors that are happening. Like the little bumps and divots. But by and large, this looks pretty good. I might say, let's see, because type is fairly digital already and pretty clean. I'm going to say fewer paths, fewer corners. Oh, maybe more corners, so I don't want to lose the roundness of it. Maybe less noise. There we go. That gives me the roundness I'm looking for. Okay, and then what do? If I'm happy with that, I hit expand, because this is only a trial, an experiment. Right. And of course, it took my ink sketch of Nico as well. So it might make sense to work all of these together. Or I could just separate Nico out, which I will, into its own layer. So again, it's all organizational. So how can I do that?